Welcome to Module 6 in Family Resource Management. In this module, we are looking at family resources. We are talking a little bit about how they are measured, how we manage them, what types of resources there are. We'll look at a few things related to theories when it comes to resources. So just everything resources for families. So I don't know if any of you have ever heard this saying, but my mother's menu consisted of two choices, take it or leave it. That may be something you've been told before. So when we think about resources, what types of resources maybe come to mind? Typically, financial resources are going to be an easy given, but what about human resources? What about environmental resources? What is a resource? Anything that is identified to meet an existing or future need. It's really anything that people use or might use to achieve something. And so I think this graphic here is a really great example that it doesn't matter how many resources you have, if you don't know how to use them, it's never going to be enough. So if you can't tell in that image, those are ladders and he is still in this picture peering over the top of that wall rather than putting together those ladders and having the resource to meet his goals. He just doesn't know how to use them. So when we think about if there's not a use for a resource, then it's useless. So when we talk about these resources, no matter how many we have, if we don't know how to utilize them effectively, then they're not really worth anything. So in this next little bit, we're going to talk through several different things that resources really need to have or to be in order to be useful. So this first one, I bet you're wondering, like, why do I have pictures of diamonds on here? They have typically been mined in great quantity for industrial use because of how well they cut things. But when you think about diamonds in American culture, they've become a symbol of marriage or wealth. The value of the diamond has become much different when we started valuing them in that sense. And so when we think about, Tiffany's, we think about these diamonds that are worth so much, and that value is placed sometimes even on a relationship by the size of a diamond that someone is given. I don't necessarily agree with that personally, but if you look at American culture, until something is given a value, it could be very different. So what about a penny? How many of you would pick up a penny on the sidewalk or just keep walking by? Resources have to have certain characteristics to make them usable. A resource must have purpose or utility. Would it be different if it was $1 on the sidewalk? I don't know if you remember it because I don't even remember it, but there was a time whenever they had parking meters that pennies and nickels could fund your parking for the day. Now we have apps and things like that that we have to use. But resources must have a utility and purpose. People will pass by pennies all the time because they can't really do anything with one penny. So they have a less of a purpose or utility in our society. Okay, resources have to be accessible. This example here that we're looking at is talking about a specialized surgery. If a person needs it, but they can't get to the hospital or they're not close enough, then it's useless, right? It has to be accessible. What about if a person has money in the bank and they need it at night? Well, normally the banks are closed at night, so it doesn't do them much good. But if we put it in the ATM, then they have access to it and that's accessible. So we have to be able to access the resources when we need them. A resource must be available where it is needed. So transferability. Real estate may be a really good resource and an investment, but it's not able to be transferred as quickly as stocks could be. Resources need to be interchangeable. They have to be able to be exchanged for other things. When we go to the grocery store and exchange cash for food we can take home and prepare, or we go to a restaurant and exchange cash for the service of having the meal prepared, cooked, and brought to us. Think about how someone in a community might help in a garden in exchange for tomatoes. The green beans that could then be exchanged for tulips from another neighbor. So those are thyme, tomatoes, green beans, etc., being exchanged for something else. Okay. When we look at resources, they must be capable of all of these things listed below and useful in the planning process. So they need to be used, transferred, or exchanged in how we can manage them. So those are just a few ways when we're looking at resources that we have to identify those specific things. What about the resource theory? The idea behind this theory is that it has roots in social psychology, and it maintains that people attempt to meet their needs in the context of social interaction. So according to this theory, this is through relationships that people gather resources. There are 6 types of resources, and we're going to go over each of these a little bit more in detail, that are exchanged. Those are love, status, information, money, goods, and services. So you'll see the picture to the right on the screen that's going to show you the resource theory image. So love, you give it and receive it, an expression of affectionate regard, warmth, or comfort. Status, an expression of evaluative judgment that conveys high or low prestige, regard, or esteem. So you go to school, you receive information, and then you obtain a diploma. Information itself, advice, opinions, instruction, or just things that are even used for enlightenment. What about money? Any coin, currency, something that has some standard unit of value. Goods, these could be tangible products. So for example, clothing here, food. Services, so activities on the body or belongings of a person that constitute as labor for another. This could be interpreted several different ways. I've pulled a few different scholarly articles to reference in this area. And so when we're looking at the resource theory, you can see on the left-hand vertical column, it's got particularism. On the bottom horizontal, it's concreteness, and you see less and more. So for this theory also identifies that resources are either particular as well as their degree of concreteness. And the theory does explain a lot about human behavior and economics, but its weakness is that the meaning of the exchange is more important than the exchange itself. So it represents something different from pure economic behavior. So for example here, resources that are in this area under that blue particular area, love, you're probably very particular with who you exchange that with. Money, you may hand that to the cashier and not know who they are, but we do that pretty much every day. So who we are exchanging love with, we might be a little bit more particular about. When we're looking at selling a car, like the concreteness, it's gone. Once we have sold the car, we don't have it anymore. Once we provide information to someone, we still have it. So you can see how it's more and less concrete in that sense. One more thing, if you have any questions about this theory, just reach out and let me know. Sometimes that one's a little confusing. Moving right along into types of resources. We've got human resources, economic resources, and each of these we've got a lot of information underneath them. So cognitive or mental resources are the most common of human resources, but they're also the most flexible. So even though time is not a resource within like the person itself, it's the most fundamental resource in their control. There is an example on page 113 that I'd love for you to pause and read about. It's Julie and Shannon and how they relate to time. So when we talk about economic resources, this one's one we're probably super familiar with and identify with quickly. So family economic resources are gained by either acquisition or inheritance. So a worker may earn money by either a wage or a salary. And so just to make sure everyone's familiar, if you're paid wages, you are earning this by the hour. There are minimum wage levels that are set by the Fair Labor Standards Act, and this has changed over the years in many states. And so when we talk about minimum wage, that's a set number. When we're talking about living wage, we're saying this is the minimum hourly wage necessary for someone to achieve a certain standard of living. The controversy around this centers on the definition of poverty, making sure that individuals are able to live above poverty level when we're talking about living wages. So let's hop back to that salary idea. When we talk about salary, typically these are workers who have specific skills that have moved into careers that have specific needs. And so it's reported by the Pew Research Center that households headed by millennial college grads with a bachelor's degree earned roughly around $56,000 more than households who were headed by a millennial high school graduate. And so initially, a salary earner may have less than someone without that degree, but over time they advance more quickly and increase their income more quickly. And so something else to consider, and we talk a lot about this in another class I teach, but the benefits package when we're talking about resources related to money. The benefits package could potentially make a lower salary worth the job. So there's an example on page 115 if you want to check that out, what it's talking about. And then to further dive deeper into inheritance and some of the laws and things attached to that, you can reference that on page 116. So what about environmental resources and social resources? These are the last two that we're focusing on in this chapter. Environmental resources are either renewable or non-renewable. So if it's renewable, this means that it can be renewed and not depleted. So flow resources, for example, would be sun and wind. These are on a continual basis. Plants, animals, fish, even though considered unlimited, if we overuse these too much, then we will deplete the supply. So that's a little bit of an exception to that rule. Non-renewable are things that are available in limited quantity. Once it's used, we are not able to just naturally replace that. So minerals and fossil fuels. Think about all of the environmental resources that we have taken advantage of. You'll see a little bit about conserving resources under that area as well. Social resources, these are resources that are felt and collectively owned. So they are more found inside families when we're talking about the functions of caring for and meeting the needs of a family member. When it comes to relationship skills, kind of the family function for that is that it's typically passed on. Another way that we see family social resources would be that they pass on their history through photos, through heirlooms, those things that are left to you to tell the story. Outside of the family, when we're talking about social resources, looking at collective socialization, which is a process by which children within a community's social network are influenced by common behavioral expectations. There's some examples on page 119 about Bernard and Jenny also going back to the family social resources. So when we think about the advantages of social resources, if people in a community band together, they can have a good quality of life with lots of advantages when it comes to social resources. So those are the four that we're talking about in this class. But how do we measure resources? When an exchange of resources is made, most people prefer to have an equitable exchange. So they receive something equal to what they give. So paying for milk in the grocery store, we want it to be a good quality. But if we're exchanging a resource with a family member, we may not expect them to give us something in return. And so when we talk about the theory of relative resources, we assume that the balance of power in that relationship is going to be found with the partner who has the most resources. Traditionally, that balance has favored the male partner. Their earning power and contributions and status typically outweighed the value of homemaking and childrearing. This tends to be viewed from a cultural context of the United States. However, other cultures place different meanings and values on resources as well. So when we're talking about family resources, they are typically used to meet those basic needs, right? When families are worrying about how to use the resource or if they'll have enough of a resource, this can cause a lot of stress. Monetary resources typically help the family in a tangible way. Think about if there are doctor bills to pay. Think about other times, though, when other resources are needed when money can't fix the problem. There are a lot of ways that families are influenced on how to manage their resources. When we talk about resource allocation and use, the word resourcefulness comes up quite a bit. So this is the ability to identify and use resources effectively. Some people want to protect their resources. A way that we can do this is through insurance. And so when we talk about some of these behaviors, there are typically strategies that are used in the decision-making process, multi-layered decisions. When it comes to the decision-making process, looking at the power, there is either orchestration or implementation power. And orchestration power is the responsibility for major decisions that often determine the lifestyle of a family. And then implementation power is the responsibility for day-to-day decisions. So when it comes to resource allocation and being mindful of our resources like resourcefulness, there's a lot of strategies and decisions that go into that. And so I really love this example here. This is referencing back into page 126, the Sandoz family. The idea that fair isn't always equal. So this image here that you see on the right-hand side of the screen, you have 3 children cheering at a baseball game. You have 3 wooden boxes. In the left image, each child has 1 box. Then you still have the trouble of one of the children not being able to see. If you look on the right image, you see that the child on the left-hand side doesn't have a box, the child in the middle has 1, and the child on the end, the far right, has 2. So now everyone is able to see. But you can see in this image, they don't all have the same thing, but they still have the same outcome. Everyone is able to see. So fair isn't everyone getting the same thing. Fair is everyone getting what they need in order to be successful. So take a look at that family on page 126. So as we wrap up, just some things to think about. Why do families have differences in their definition of resourcefulness? What are the possible benefits that are available to employees? Why is it important to evaluate these whenever you are taking a job? How can time be more valuable than money? And explain why a resource must have utility or purpose. Those are just a few things to extend your thinking for Module 6. Now, the assignment in Module 6 is going to send you on a scavenger hunt. So you're welcome to click through this or go into Module 6 and find out what you are doing for that assignment. There is also a quick little activity for us to identify paradigms. So just like we've talked about in this chapter, how people see something is different than someone else and how people use things. So one person may think buying pre-made items is more important so that they can have time to watch TV in the evening. That's a paradigm. And we're going to look at paradigm shifts. So go to Module 6 and explore a paradigm shift as well. If you have any questions or need anything, please just reach out and let me know. Thank you.